we're going to talk about the Song of Songs today and try to understand what they're about. And the Song of Songs is definitely like one of the most perplexing of all the books in the Bible. It's utterly unlike the other books in the Bible in that it is um, really, really romantic and erotic. And although it uses metaphors to express its eroticism, it is definitely talking about two people who want to make love to each other and who are longing for each other. And the other thing which makes the Song of Songs interesting is that we don't really talk about or hear about it now. I looked through the lectionary, which is the set readings which we do in a 3-year cycle in the Christian Church. And this is done by Catholics as well as Protestants. And the Song of Songs, there's only one reading from the Song of Songs that comes up, and it's from chapter 2. It comes up twice over 3 years, and it's optional. Like it's one of the Hebrew Scriptures readings, and even then, one of the weeks it's a psalm or the Song of Songs. So basically, we don't deal with it. It is completely ignored. Which is a pity, because what's interesting about the Song of Songs is that for about 1,000 years or so, it was the most commented on book of the Hebrew Scriptures of all. When scholars go back through and look at what people in the Middle Ages wrote about when they wanted to write about the Bible, they wrote about the Song of Songs. And the reason they wrote about it was that it was used as a devotional, as a text which allowed you to plumb the depths of your spirituality. I think it says volumes that we don't even touch it now. Gives you an idea of how much has changed in Christianity. So let's start with some basic stuff like when was it written? No one knows who wrote it, although there's debates about who wrote it, so we'll talk about that. But when was it written? Well, it's called the Song of Solomon, like right at the very top of chapter 1. And King Solomon lived in the 900s before Christ. But the language in the Song of Songs seems too recent for that. It has a lot of borrow words, so words that it's borrowed from other languages. It was written in Hebrew, but it borrows words from Aramaic, which is the sort of language that Hebrew evolved into. Christ and his followers were all just speaking Aramaic on the streets. So, and for that reason, scholars think that it was probably written somewhere in the 400s to 300s. So it couldn't possibly have been written by Solomon, which is interesting because it mentions Solomon and it has that inscription right at the top. And yet it was pretty common back then to ascribe texts to people even if they didn't write them. So, for instance, some of Paul's letters in the New Testament are presented as though Paul wrote them, but scholars are very confident that he didn't. And people did this because they said, oh, this is the kind of thing Paul would say. And in this case, this is the kind of thing that Solomon would say. And the reason they said that was that Solomon was considered the wisest Jewish king ever. When he was selected to be the king of Israel, he was one of David's sons. He famously, when God asked him, what do you want? He didn't ask for riches or power, he asked for wisdom. And so that makes him the wise king. And although he did make mistakes, he's the wise king, and he wrote, tradition has it that he wrote Ecclesiastes and he wrote Proverbs, which are both wisdom books. So whoever wrote the Song of Songs, or the people who wrote the Song of Songs, when it was put together as a collection, they figured it makes sense that Solomon would have written this because there's so much wisdom in it. Which may strike you as odd because it doesn't sound like a wisdom text to us, but we'll get into that. So before I go any further, I'm just curious, what were your impressions of the Song of Songs? Like, you were getting them by email every day. What did you feel or think as you were reading them?
Is this from the Bible?
Right? Yeah. Why did it not sound biblical?
Well, it's we're not used to hearing people speak about love in the intimate way in the Bible. And I was just thinking of all the far right religious denominations that would have an absolute bird if they if they ever got to read this.
Right.
It would be quite shocking. And the other part, I love the artwork that you find, Stephen, is just so beautiful and just enriches it so much. And your comments about it, it was really delightful to read it, but not expecting to have such a different aspect of the Bible. It was really great.
Yeah, indeed. And it's, you can see it's inspired all sorts of artists through the years,
Mhm.
particularly in the last 200 years, because they've seen it as just incredibly surprising that it should be in the Bible, but also so erotic and so beautifully written, right? That it's inspired all sorts of art. Chagall did a series on them, Dali did a series on them, inspired all sorts of 19th century painters. There's been all sorts of music written on it, particularly in the 20th century. There's lots of music, and I shared a link to David Lang's beautiful piece. But there's lots of those. There's lots of operatic settings of it. So yeah, it's been very inspirational in the 20th century, even though that inspiration hasn't happened in a religious context, which is interesting.
I enjoyed it so much. I actually copied it into Word. I'm on my laptop so that I have a large monitor where I can actually have my Word document with all of them open while I'm looking at it, and just looking at some of these pictures and some of the comments. It's just beautiful. Really love
Nice. Wonderful. Thank you.
it.
Bonnie?
I was very struck by the poetry of it and the imagery, metaphorical, but so rich. And because in my research days, I did a whole lot of work on the erotic in religion, in ancient religions. And so that part didn't surprise me at all for that period. Um, and the best of the poets love poets who spoke about love, the best poetry comes from the expression of desire, not fulfillment, not
Mm,
mating, and not finding your true love, but desire. And the poet who expresses this, I think, most richly, and the one whom I really fastened onto was Sappho.
mm,
And the Greek word pathos, desire, longing, um, is not a negative word, and it's not a negative feeling. It's one that bursts into flower with the imagination and the music. Her poetry was sung, um, and it couldn't be as rich if it weren't fueled by desire.
Yeah, and the poems are just full of longing. It's funny. The first one sort of sounds as though it's talking about consummation, but the rest of them, there's lots of longing and searching and failure to find what you're looking for, and that tension of expectation and anticipation. Yeah, it makes them very, very dramatic. Isabel?
Yeah, I'm sorry I was a little bit late, so maybe I missed the introduction, but I'm a kind of a literal person, and I'm curious to know why this is in the Bible.
We will get to that. We will absolutely get to that, because that has been a question people have asked as long as this has been in the Bible, because it's so different from the rest of the Bible. So don't worry, we will definitely get there. Um, but before we get into that, why don't we just dip back into the text a little bit and just read some of it? And I want to just take a couple of we'll read a couple of chunks just from the first and second chapter. So I need one reader for this first chunk. Anybody want to read some beautiful poetry?
I could do
Okay, Kathy, great, thanks.
it.
Okay, if you could read this, please, Kathy.
Solomon's Song of Songs, chapter 1. Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for your love is better than wine. Your anointing oils are fragrant. Your name is perfume poured out. Therefore, the maidens love you. Draw me after you. Let us make haste. The king has brought me into his chambers. We will exult and rejoice in you. We will extol your love more than wine. Rightly do they love you.
Okay. So I'm just going to keep the slide up here for a second. Who is speaking here? So it starts off saying that it's Solomon's Song of Songs. Does it sound like a man is speaking those first couple of lines?
No.
No. Right? We can assume that this is a heterosexual poem, given the way the rest of it goes. So it sure sounds like a woman is saying, let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth. But so let's assume that this is the female lover who's speaking. Is she speaking all the way through this section? Let's look at
No, at some point she said it changes to we.
Right.
And at that point, I'm getting a new idea about this particular chapter or this section. And I'm thinking maybe the woman's gone to the king's chamber to tell the king about her lover and to ask for special permission to be married to him or something. And the king and her are saying, what a great guy this is. Sure, you can have him, even if your parents say no.
But who is this we who speaks at the end? Well, the answer is in this portion of the text, it's hard to know, but just a little bit later, she refers to the people she's talking to as the daughters of Jerusalem. And so it looks like she starts off by speaking, and then the daughters of Jerusalem, her girlfriends basically, join in and say, we will exult and rejoice in you. We will extol your love more than wine, echoing the line from the top. Rightly do they love you. So it starts off as a woman speaking, and then her girlfriends chime in. And what's interesting is that it doesn't help you figure this out, right? There's no he, she, they, right? It doesn't help you at all. And it's like this all the way through the poem, where it is not clear who is speaking ever. Now, there's some guides that you can use, like she speaks about her lover as her beloved, whereas he speaks about her as his love. So that helps a bit, but still there's no clear demarcations, and people over the centuries have argued about who's speaking when. It's usually clear when he's speaking and she's speaking, but some people say that he's got a bunch of friends who speak, and she definitely has some friends, the daughters of Jerusalem, who speak. But what's interesting is just empirically, right? This poem isn't helping you understand who's speaking when. And what's interesting about that, right, is it's a poem about passion. And when you're in the grips of passion, the difference between you and your lover breaks down, right? There's these points where you are he and she is you, and like when it gets really good, the firm distinctions between you and me break down. And this poem has embodied that by saying, I'm not going to tell you who's speaking. Because the way passion works, it gets blurry. And so this poem is going to be blurry. It's quite brilliant. It's one of those things where it doesn't announce what it's doing, but it does it really well. Okay, so let's carry on and introduce the male voice into this. And for this, we'll need 2 readers. Anybody want to read? Okay, Isabel? Okay, anybody else? Okay, Kathy, great. Oh, and Bonnie. Okay, great. Isabel and Bonnie. I would read this, but I think it got a little weird since Isabel's my mother, so let's not go there. So Isabel, Bonnie, you're gonna go first, okay?
Her. Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for your love is better than wine. Oops, had that. Oh, this her?
Yeah, if you
You
could
want the
do
black
this
and
one,
white?
that's, yeah, I with line 5, yeah.
Okay, yeah, that was the earlier one. Oops, now what? Can you back up one? Black and beautiful is what I
Yes,
saw
that's where we
first.
should go. Yep. Yeah, that's where you should start, at Black and Beautiful.
And I don't, there, let's try it again. Maybe it's my computer, I don't know.
Do you
Not
see
yet,
it?
it's coming. Now I do. I am black and beautiful, O daughters of Jerusalem, like the tents of Kedar, like the curtains of Solomon. Do not gaze at me because I am dark, because the sun has gazed on me. My mother's sons were angry with me. They made me keeper of the vineyards, but my own vineyard I have not kept. Tell me, you whom my soul loves, where you pasture your flock, where you make it lie down at noon. For why should I be like one who is veiled beside the flocks of your companions?
Great, thank you. And Isabel?
If you do not know, O fairest among women, follow the tracks of the flock and pasture your kids beside the shepherd's tents. I compare you, my love, to a mare among Pharaoh's chariots. Your cheeks are comely with ornaments, your neck with strings of jewels. We will make you ornaments of gold studded with silver.
Okay, great. So you can hear the switch in voices, right? So the first page is the woman speaking, and then he comes in, if you do not know, O fairest among women, right? And he says, he refers to her in line 9 as my love. And the reference to a mare among Pharaoh's chariots is one way of interpreting that is that back in the day, the Egyptians would use all male horses for their chariots. So enemy forces would try to confuse the horses by sending in mares into the crowd of oncoming chariots, so that the male horses would be drawn away to chase the mares rather than coming at the battle line. So I compare you, my love, to a mare among Pharaoh's chariots. Your femininity creates confusion. It's kind of a So what do you think? Reactions to this chunk?
She's black, is that unusual?
Yeah, so since it's Black History Month, we should talk about that. So this has a really, really interesting history. So first thing to know is that our kind of racism didn't really exist in biblical times. Like, it's something which starts around 500 years ago with the slavery trade, where whites convince themselves and then the world that Black people are inferior, therefore it's okay to enslave them. Of course, it never was. And in New Testament times, even the Roman Empire did lots of things wrong, but they weren't racist. The religious folks of that time did lots of things wrong, but they weren't racist. If you want to look for hatred in the Bible, you'll find lots of it in between religions. People hold each other's religion against each other, but even when they hate each other the most, they don't say, and you're the wrong color. Like, that just doesn't come up. And it's not like everybody was the same color. This is the Middle East, right? Middle East and North Africa is the territory in which the Bible operates. And of course, there'd be darker people from Africa and, brownish people in the Middle East, with, the odd European, visitor who would be less dark skinned. So they knew about multiple colors of people. They just didn't care, just didn't register. And yet this poem starts in the first chapter, I am black and I am beautiful. And then it sounds like she needs to defend herself on this. So what does that mean? Well, what's interesting is that in the original Hebrew, the word which is translated and, so I am black and beautiful, can also mean or. So it can mean and, or. And this, unfortunately, has opened this great big loophole in the text through which entire cultures have driven. And so in Jesus's time, they translated it as and beautiful. And they used a Greek Bible at that time because everybody spoke Greek on the streets, or rather, Greek was the sort of English language of its time. It was the lingua franca. So Christ and his followers would have been reading a Greek version of the Hebrew scriptures. And in that version of the Bible, which was translated in 250 BCE, it said black and beautiful. So they would have heard it just black and beautiful. In the Latin Bible, however, that was translated by Jerome and 6 women in the 400s, he translated it as black but beautiful. And that's the way it stayed in the Latin Bible. And that meant that the text was saying, I'm black but beautiful. Like, you shouldn't assume I'm not beautiful because I'm black. Like, her blackness is a problem and she's protesting, but I can be beautiful even though I'm black. And although born in a pre-racist time, once racism sets in with the slave trade, white readers of the Bible go, see, there you go, that's proof. Even the Bible doesn't think that black people are beautiful. And it lasts that way all through the slave trade into the 20th century. And one of the things which I like about Lawrence Park is that we have a lot of Bibles here. And so I went into our library and I was looking at the Bibles, and our oldest Bible is from 1851. And it's a translation of the Latin Vulgate, so Jerome's Bible, into English. And it preserved what Jerome had put in there. I am black but beautiful, O ye daughters of Jerusalem. And then 100 years later, if you open to Gideon's Bible, the one that's in every hotel, its translation is, I am black but comely, O ye daughters of Jerusalem. So nothing has changed. And it's not until 1989, which is not very long ago, that the New Revised Standard Version said, I am black and beautiful. 1989. And the reason that translation came about was that people of color were admitted into the academy in sufficient numbers that theologians were able to take a look at this and go, it doesn't have to be translated that way. So even though in the 1960s, people were talking about, black is beautiful, that didn't register for like another 20 years in the Bible, when finally the New Revised Standard Version said, okay, we're going to change it back to the way Christ would have read it. It's not like a radical proposition here. It's not like bowing to leftist politics. We're just reading it the way Christ would have read it. So it's just, when white people get an idea in their mind and they want to keep it, they can keep it for a very, very long time. And grotesquely unfair, really. Funny?
The Greeks referred to the people of North Africa generally, because their geography wasn't all that precise, as Ethiopians. And they consider the Ethiopians as particularly blessed by the gods, and that the closeness to the sun that darkened their face was a blessing. So the Greeks not only weren't racist, but they thought that the Ethiopians were privileged.
Yeah, and I think that that's something that we should remember when we hear her words, I'm dark-skinned because I've been in the sun. That sounds to our ears as though she's saying, oh, no, don't, I've just got a tan. Otherwise I would be lighter skinned. But their understanding of why black people were black was simply because they were born pale skinned, but their exposure to the sun gave them dark skin. So, and it's a pre-racist time. So they're not saying that white people are the normal and everybody else is different, but rather you know, God makes us beautiful in various ways, right? And our skin color is one of those ways. And she's the star of this poem. Let us not forget, she is the star of this poem, and she starts with, I am black and beautiful. So, you know, it's a clear affirmation of the beauty of her appearance. So why don't we carry on and read a little bit more of the poem. This is from chapter 2, and I need 4 readers for this. Anybody want to read? Everybody want to read? Okay, Isabel, Kathy. This is why you got to, you know, encourage your friends to come to these things so you don't have to read so much. Isabel, Kathy Patterson, do you want to have a go? Great, thank you. Okay, and why don't I do one too? Okay, so. Okay, go ahead, Isabel.
The voice of my beloved. Look, he comes, leaping upon the mountains, bounding over the hills. My beloved is like a gazelle or a young stag. Look, there he stands behind our wall, gazing in at the windows, looking through the lattice. My beloved speaks and says to me.
Actually, I'll do this part just since it calls for a male. Arise, my love, my fair one, and come away. For now the winter is past, the rain is over and gone. The flowers appear on the earth, the time of singing has come. The voice of the turtle dove is heard in our land. The fig tree puts forth its figs, and the vines are in blossom. They give forth fragrance. And Kathy Patterson, if you go next.
Arise, my love, my fair one, and come away. O my dove, in the clefts of the rock, in the covert of the cliffs, let me see your face. Let me hear your voice, for your voice is sweet and your face is lovely. Catch us the foxes, the little foxes that ruin the vineyards, for our vineyards are in blossom.
Great, thank you. And the other Kathy, if you could go now, please.
My beloved is mine, and I am his. He pastures his flock among the lilies until the day breeze and the shadows flee. Turn, my beloved, be like a gazelle or a young stag on the cleft mountains.
Such beautiful words, eh? My beloved is mine and I am his, until the day breathes and the shadows flee. T.S. Eliot said once that the difference between art and technology is that art never improves because the human heart doesn't change much. So you may express your art in different ways, like in film, with electric guitars, whatever, but hearing words like that, it's like, has anything changed? You know? So this begs the question, of course, of who are we talking about? Who are these people? And one of the traditions of this is that this is a song that Solomon wrote, perhaps a wedding song to one of his many brides, because the Bible tells us that he had hundreds of wives. And so it must be King Solomon. So this must be about King Solomon. And yet, in this section that we heard, we hear of the lover, the male lover, sneaking up in the nighttime, peering through the lattice to his lover. And no king needs to sneak up or peer through the lattice, right? King Solomon gets what King Solomon wants, right? So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense that this is King Solomon skulking around. This sounds like it's a young man and a young woman. And although the poem does mention King Solomon a few times, and he'll refer to her as, she'll refer to her lover as a king, as you saw with the language chosen for their dalliance, metaphor is everything here, right? Just go back to the last page here. Okay, my beloved is mine and I am his. That seems straightforward. He pastures his flock among the lilies. You know, and the line about the fox in the vineyards, you know, a flock of lilies, or rather a field of lilies and a vineyard is not a field of lilies and a vineyard, right? She's talking about herself, her body, her pleasures, his access to those, right? So, and there's lots of images of this where he, we're talking about clefts in mountains, Judy Chicago, right, of the dinner party fame, the American artist who does vagina-based art, basically, or at least that's one of the things that she's done. She actually did a series of paintings based on the Song of Songs, and her depiction of the cleft mountains is what you think she would do. It's just like, oh, I know exactly what that cleft mountain looks like, and yet,
Hey, couple of boobies.
Nope, it wasn't boobies, actually.
Oh.
It's Judy Chicago, so think lower. So, and she's not wrong, like if you're going to talk about cleft mountains and stuff, then yeah, we're talking about, the female body, of course we are. So anyway, it seems problematic that Solomon is the one who could be doing this, but that is traditionally the way this poem has been read. And that's a way I think of biblical apologists trying to save some face here. But why don't we read another chunk, just to get into more of the depth of this. Why don't I read this part? It's 3 slides. So. And just listen to the language and pay attention to who are these people. This is from chapter 4. You have ravished my heart, my sister, my bride. You have ravished my heart with a glance of your eyes, with one jewel of your necklace. How sweet is your love, my sister, my bride. How much better is your love than wine, and the fragrance of your oils than any spice. Your lips distill nectar, my bride. Honey and milk are under your tongue. The scent of your garments is like the scent of Lebanon. A garden locked is my sister, my bride. A garden locked, a fountain sealed. Your channel is an orchard of pomegranates with all choicest fruits. Henna with nard. Nard and saffron, calamus and cinnamon, with all trees of frankincense, myrrh and aloes, with all chief spices. A garden fountain, a well of living water, and flowing streams from Lebanon. Awake, O north wind, and come, O south wind. Blow upon my garden, that its fragrance may be wafted abroad. Let my beloved come to his garden and eat its choicest fruits. Reactions?
What I
Excuse me.
find here, and I find it throughout the poem, is the degree to which sensual things were in their everyday experience. All of the metaphors. It seemed either these particular writers or the times, they really enjoyed their fruits. They really enjoyed the beauty of a garden, and because they make the connection between the passion for another person's body, they make the similes or the metaphors to be all these things in nature. And so it was a time where people really noticed the smells out in nature and the wonderful richness of the natural world. And I think an erotic poem written today would probably use man-made things. We'd talk about leather couches, or we'd talk about erotic buildings, you know, like the building out in Mississauga, the Marilyn Monroe building or something. I don't know that there are many of us who could grasp out of nature such tactile and sensory things. We're not that, I'm not sure that most of us are that attuned to, you know, the fuzz on a peach and the smell of it fresh off the tree. And so it strikes me as they were in luxurious times. And also maybe that points to the identity of the couple, and, you know, that they had time and leisure to notice things like this, or they had wealth. They weren't, or maybe it was the times, you know, people lived in comfortable times. It was a fertile country. And so there were lots of fruits and wonderful things to eat and smell and enjoy and taste. The richness of nature and the analogies are amazing.
Yeah, indeed. I think Isabel had her hand up, and then Bonnie.
Yeah, I'm cross-referencing this with our talk about the indigenous peoples, and I think that they're more in touch with nature and with basic issues such as fruits, vegetables, the spirit, ground, and the forces of nature. And so if we start to grasp some of their concepts, we may make these come alive again in our culture.
Thank you. Bonnie?
Again, going back to my work on ancient religion and the culture generally and the pervasive eroticism, it was a pervasive thought was that the continuum between the natural world and the human world was such that making love could stimulate natural fertility, would stimulate natural fertility. And this was honored in rituals that I did some work on. And so when you have rituals of Aphrodite or poems about Aphrodite, it'll be surrounded by a burgeoning of flowers and fruits. So it wasn't that it was metaphorical. There was a cause and effect between the two because it was all of a piece, and the gods encouraged it.
Yeah, and that became a real issue when trying to figure out why this thing is in the Bible.
Yeah.
Because the way it sounds like two unmarried lovers, right? Who they don't live together. There doesn't seem to be anything official about their relationship since he has to sneak around and she goes, you know, searching for him in the city and so forth at one point. And so if this is a song about two unmarried lovers who deeply desire each other and obviously want to have physical consummation, that poses a huge problem for why it's in the Bible, because you can divide human history basically into two periods: before the pill and after the pill. After the birth control pill, human sexuality changed enormously because every act of intercourse wasn't necessarily a potential pregnancy. Human society before the pill, particularly in patriarchal societies, was organized around the principle that women should never have sex with anyone they weren't married to, because what if they got pregnant? You know, and this would be, and this was very, very problematic in societies where you had high infant mortality rates, so women were depended upon to have a lot of children because a lot of the children were going to die. In Jesus's time, women would get, like Jewish women, would get married around the age of, well, as soon as they were fertile, basically 14, 15, they would get married, and generally they would get married to men who were like 25. And so these young lovers shouldn't exist. This is not allowed. You can't just have sex outside of marriage. You just cannot. It's not allowed. It's condemned completely in the Old Testament all over the place. And, just read Paul. He'll tell you, best thing of all would be not to get married at all, but certainly not premarital sex. So the beautiful erotic poetry of these two unmarried lovers is a problem. And yet the language in this particular chunk, he is addressing her as my sister, my bride. My bride, my bride, my bride. He keeps saying that. And that is why this is still in the Bible, because people could force an interpretation on it to say, okay, maybe they're really married, even though it's obvious that they're not, but maybe they're really married, or maybe he wants to marry her. My bride, my bride, my bride. But it's still a problem, right? Because lovers who fall in love with each other that was considered a dangerous force in ancient society. Think of the Samson and Delilah story, right? Samson really falls for Delilah. That's a passionate story, and she's able to betray him as a result. There's all sorts of cautionary tales in the Bible about falling in love outside of marriage. There are no great unmarried couples in the Bible. And even Adam and Eve, they imagined as married. So what are you going to do about that? Well, what they did was, and this happened among the Jews as well as the Christians, it's not just the Christians who interpreted it this way. They decided it must be an allegory of God's love for us. So they decided, nope, this cannot possibly be about two unmarried lovers. It must be an allegory about the consuming love that God has for us. And the Jews got there first. In the year 100, there was a council held by rabbis where they were trying to figure out which of the various scrolls should make it into the canon of the Hebrew scriptures. And we actually have minutes of that meeting, believe it or not. And this is what they said. And this happened around the year 100. Rabbi Simeon ben Azai said, I have a tradition from the 72 elders on the day that Rabbi Eleazar ben Azariah was appointed president of the academy, that both the Song of Songs and Koheleth, which is Chronicles, are sacred. And then said Rabbi Akiba, heaven forfend, no one in Israel ever disputed that the Song of Songs is sacred, for all the world is not as worthy as the day on which the Song of Songs was given to Israel. For all the writings are holy, but the Song of Songs is the holy of holies. So, but they said that because they felt that the whole thing was an allegorical meditation on God's love for the people of Israel. And if you read their interpretations, they break it down like sentence by sentence. This refers, like there's a portion in the poem where the male lover comes knocking. That's Moses knocking on the doors on the night of Passover, telling the Israelites to put blood on their doorways so that the angel of death will pass over their household. And then the next line and the next line and the next line are related to the Israelites as they escaped Egypt and went to the Red Sea and passed through the Red Sea as the waters stood aside, and then got to the other side and rejoiced as the waters closed down on the Pharaoh and his men. Like, they break it down line by line that way, reading it allegorically. And they felt that this is the greatest gift that we have from God. Of all the scriptures that we have, this is the one that gives us the most insight into God's love for the Israelites. Now, I'm not going to get into this in much more detail just because we're Christians, not Jews. So there may well be something on YouTube that explains how they understood it for Jews. But since we're Christians, I wanted to take a look at how Christians interpreted the poem. The idea that God could consider Israel God's bride is not unique to it isn't mentioned in the Song of Songs. It sure sounds like it's a song of, two unmarried lovers. But in Isaiah, there is this language of God thinking of Israel as God's bride. And I'm just going to read this to you so you can see that the rabbis weren't making this up. There was some precedent for it. So in Isaiah 62, it says, "For the Lord will take delight in you, and your land will be married. As a young man marries a young woman, so will your builder marry you. As a bridegroom rejoices over his bride, so will your God rejoice over you." Okay, so that language, that metaphor, God being the bridegroom, already exists in the Hebrew scriptures. And around the year 100, the rabbis say, okay, we've been interpreting it that way, that the bridegroom in the Song of Solomon is actually God, and his bride is us, the people of Israel. So the Christians didn't want to think that this Song of Songs applied to Israel, because of course they weren't interested in Israel, they were interested in the church, right? And so what did they do? Well, not surprisingly, they went back to the New Testament and they said, maybe that can give us some guidance. And it does. So for this, I'd just like us to read a couple of passages from the New Testament. So can I get 2 readers, please? Okay, Kathy and Wendy, great, thank you. So Kathy, you'll go first. So we're going to hear 2 passages. First one will be from the Gospel of Matthew, and the second one from the Gospel of John. When it refers to John in these passages, it's referring to John the Baptist. Okay, so Kathy, you're up first. Okay, go ahead.
Hey, then the disciples of John came to Jesus, saying, "Why do we and the Pharisees fast often, but your disciples do not fast?" And Jesus said to them, "The wedding guests cannot mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them, can they? The days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast."
Okay, so Jesus is referring to himself as the bridegroom there. And now this next chunk comes from the Gospel of John. Okay, go ahead, Wendy.
Now, a discussion about purification arose between John's disciples and a Jew. And they came to John and said to him, "Rabbi, the one who was with you across the Jordan, to whom you testified, here he is baptizing, and all are going to him." John answered, "No one can receive anything except what has been given from heaven."
Okay, and if you could read this next slide too, please.
"You yourselves are my witnesses that I said, I am not the Messiah, but I have been sent ahead of him. He who has the bride is the bridegroom. The friend of the bridegroom, who stands and hears him, rejoices greatly at the bridegroom's voice. For this reason, my joy has been fulfilled. He must increase, but I must decrease.
Great. So who do these texts say the bridegroom is?
Jesus.
Jesus, right. And who's the bride then?
The people, the message.
The people, yeah, the people who follow Jesus, right? At that time, it's only, a few hundred people, but it will grow to be the church. The church is the bride. And this metaphor of bridegroom and bride, if you think about it, it's really, really central to the New Testament, particularly to the Gospels. What's the first miracle that Jesus does in the Gospel of John? Where is he when that happens?
Wedding?
Yeah, he's at a wedding. He turns water into wine. Like the very first thing he does in the Gospel of John is that he attends a wedding. And what's interesting about that story is if you read it, it mentions the bridegroom's father, the wine steward, the guests, Mary, Jesus. It never mentions the bride. Because we're the bride. Like that story, it seems like it's a sort of set piece of, wow, look, Christ is breaking the laws of physics, but John's way too sophisticated for that. He's setting up what the entire gospel is about. The entire gospel, from his point of view, is the coming of the bridegroom for the bride. And we're supposed to read that gospel to wake up, to realize, oh my goodness, he's the bridegroom. My bridegroom has finally arrived. Jesus tells all these parables, the 10 virgins, right? 10 virgins who are waiting for the bridegroom to arrive so they can go to the wedding party, right? 5 who are foolish, 5 who prepare. The parable which shows up in Luke and Matthew that Jesus tells about once upon a time a king held a wedding and he wanted all the best people to come to his wedding, so he sent out invitations, but all the rich people said no, and I'm busy, I gotta go do this thing and that thing, sorry, I can't come. So the king got mad and he said, just invite everybody, go to the crossroads, invite everybody you see, invite the poor, the lepers, everybody, and they all come, right? And like there's all these stories about weddings in the New Testament. And what's interesting, if you read this in the light of the Song of Songs, right, we have this really interesting parallel which emerges. That around the year 100, the Jews are deciding to include the Song of Songs in the Bible as an allegory, where God is the bridegroom and Israel's the bride. And basically at the same time, the gospel writers are writing down what Jesus said, which reveals that Jesus called himself the bridegroom, with his believers and followers as his bride. And he kept telling stories about weddings as a model of the kingdom of heaven. So as much as it may seem far-fetched to us that this highly erotic poem, which makes perfect sense being just about 2 lovers, it may seem far-fetched to us that that could be an allegory for God's love for the people, but it sure sounds like Jesus read the Song of Songs that way, because he borrows its language and applies it to himself. He says, I am the bridegroom. The bridegroom you read about, I am here right now. John the Baptist sees him as the bridegroom. Jesus calls himself the bridegroom, as we saw. Jesus goes out of his way to tell stories about how religion is really a question of God marrying the people who believe. So the Song of Songs as an allegory sure seems to be something that Jesus understood. And he used it in a way to promote his message, to help people understand what was going on. And that's a big deal, right? Because in the 20th century, particularly for people who are skeptical about religion, we tend to hear religion as being about a master-slave relationship, right? God has all the power and we're just minions who just have to, do whatever God says. And, that's why people get turned off of religion, because it seems so soul crushing, right? You're just supposed to, here's the moral rules and you're supposed to apply. But what Jesus is saying and what the Song of Songs is saying, read allegorically, is that the relationship with God should be like a love affair. It should be the most intimate relationship you have. They took the most intimate relationship 2 people can have, like, 2 people of different genders can have, and said, that's the model. That's it. That's the closest we get here on earth to understanding the sort of mystical relationship that we can have with God, where you lose track of who you are, and where God starts and stops, you lose track of that. Any comments before I go on?
Well said.
I have a comment, of course, and maybe a question. And so the Bible and folks have taken the most intimate relationship that can be to be 2 lovers, a marriage. And this is kind of directed, and I'm glad we're sort of all women here, apart from Stephen, is what about the intimacy of a mother and a child? Sometimes I find that my relationship, especially with my firstborn, is is so close that I'm feeling what he's feeling, I'm sensing, and he picks up on me too. And as I think as his relationship with a partner grows, maybe that is atrophying, and I guess because his allegiance is going to his partner. But what do women feel their relationship with their children is stronger than their relationship with their partner? Is it more passionate? Is it more intimate? To be quite crude, in a partnership between two adults, the intimacy happens on an irregular basis, or it could be quite regular. The entrance of the male into the female, but for a mother-child, that person has existed inside of us for an extended period. And so the intimacy seems greater in a way when, you know, the thing that the entity that one gives birth to has been more intimate than one's partner who created that person.
Yes, mother.
I'm thinking that it's a very different kind of relationship, and that one of the maternal obligations is to divide off the child from the parent and to give them an identity of their own.
Yes, it is. And she's in the middle of a Zoom meeting. Could I call you back?
Bonnie?
Yeah, there are crossovers. I remember in the whole birthing process, there are erotic moments. I don't know what the evolutionary purpose of all that is, but I was told that during prenatal classes, and yes, it was. And nursing, that's an erotic zone, the nipple. So there are crossovers, but I would agree that the intimacy, while powerful between mother and child, and does continue into the child's adult life at times in the way that Wendy described. I've known that with my sons, particularly one, but it's a different kind of intimacy. Very different. The intimacy between adults, lovers, partners, is one that, you know, continues in all dimensions of life and work and cooking but an understanding that's very deep, but that's very different from mother-child.
Yeah, and the metaphor of the parent-child relationship is also very, very present in the Hebrew scriptures, right? Like, we're constantly talking about God as being a parent and us being God's children. So it's not like these two metaphors are mutually exclusive. But in terms of the Song of Songs, they decided to say, okay, this is actually emblematic of how God relates to us, this passionate desire for union with us. And let me give you a couple of examples of how early Christians wrote about this. And I'll read this. Right. One of the earliest Christian theologians is Origen. Am I saying that right, Bonnie? Oregon or Origen?
Yep.
Oregon?
No, Oregon. Oregon.
Okay. So here was his commentary on that very first line in chapter 1. Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth. And he wrote, God may now no longer speak to me only by his servants. Sorry, I gotta move something here. The angels and the prophets. And he's referring to like how God used to speak through angels and prophets in the Hebrew scriptures. So God may now no longer speak to me only by his servants, the angels and the prophets, but may come himself directly and kiss me with the kisses of his mouth. That is to say, may pour the words of his mouth into mine, that I might hear him speak himself, and see him teaching. The kisses are Christ's, which he bestowed on his church, when at his coming, being present in the flesh, he in his own person spoke to her, the church, the words of faith and love and peace, according to the promise of Isaiah, who, when sent beforehand to the bride, said, "Not a messenger nor an angel, but the Lord himself shall save us." So that's Oregon's take on it. You can see that the fact that Christ is God in human form makes this argument a lot easier to make, because of course Christ was capable of kissing people, right? And not just like erotic kissing, but also, you know, the friendly kiss that you would give to someone as you first see them. So saying that this very erotic physical poem has something to do with religion made a lot of sense to Christians, because God had decided to become one of us with all the fleshiness that we have, right? And this way of looking at the Bible, or rather looking at the Song of Songs, lasted. Like, this is why this book is the one that the Middle Ages wrote the most about, because it was a way of exploring what your spirituality meant. And as early as Origen, who's writing in the early 200s, he said, it's fun, this poem, the Song of Songs, can be understood as referring to God's love for the church, but also God's love for the soul. You can read it both ways, and both readings are perfectly acceptable. And 800 years later, Saint Bernard of Clairvaux in France wrote this about, he continues that tradition, and he wrote this about how we can understand the Song of Songs as referring to the soul. That's Oregon, right? Okay, there we go. So, in the early 1100s, therefore, if a love relationship is the special and outstanding characteristic of the bride and groom, is not unfitting to call the soul that loves God a bride. Now, one who asks for a kiss is in love. It is not for liberty that she asks, nor for an award, nor for an inheritance, nor even knowledge, but for a kiss. It is obviously the request of a bride who is chaste, who brings forth a love that is holy, a love whose ardor she cannot entirely disguise. For note how abruptly she bursts into speech. About to ask a great favor from a great personage, she does not resort, as others do, to the arts of seduction. She makes no devious or fawning solicitations for the prize that she covets. There's no preamble, no attempt to conciliate favor. No, but with a spontaneous outburst from the abundance of her heart, direct even to the point of boldness, she says, "Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth."
I find this part really appealing. It's a much more of an equality there versus the old idea that God is, you're going to be punished if you do sinful things, and that whole burning in hell and that part that I really have trouble with. This is a much more palatable, loving way to look at it. I enjoy that idea. That's much, much more what I would imagine that relationship to be, in a powerful way that actually enhances my being, my soul, my life, to have that kind of relationship.
It's funny, we're not used to thinking of our relationship with God as being a passionate one, right? We, if you ask somebody about religion, it's usually, what do you believe, right? What do you think about God? Who do you think God is, right? No one asks, how does your body feel about God? It just doesn't come up, right? Like, we don't talk that way because for us, I think, large degree thanks to Luther and the Protestants, we've shifted it all into creedal statements and beliefs and stuff. It's all become very much in our head. But in the Middle Ages, they were much more in their bodies than we are. You know, Descartes hadn't happened yet. You know, a dinner party with friends could mean hopping into a bath altogether naked. Like, that was just normal, you know, and it wouldn't turn into an orgy. It was just hanging out with your friends, you know. They were much more physical in their understanding of themselves. So for them to say that our relationship with God is a love relationship, it's not an intellectual idea that they're talking about. It's a full-bodied idea, right? And Bernard is writing to his fellow monks who have given up everything for God, right? They don't have sex with women. They're not supposed to have sex with each other, although it happens. But they, and you know, he talks about how there's like 3 stages of kissing. First, you kiss the feet of God, and then you kiss the hand, and then you ask for a kiss of the mouth, because you have to go through some disciplines with yourself to get past, you know, the more physical passions before you can be ready for this kind of mystical union with God. And we can argue with that and say there's nothing wrong with, you know, being capable of physical passion and also wanting to have this kind of, you know, love relationship with God. The beauty of this text is that it begs to be interpreted. It doesn't hand its meaning to you out on a platter, right? It allows for multiple interpretations. That is its strength. That's why it's still around. Anybody else? Like, does this help you with thinking about God or feeling about God? Does it seem like science fiction?
Seems pretty difficult to have that kind of physical passion for God. I guess maybe we're too schooled in Luther's legacy.
But I think that desire for union, like, you know, the thing about joy, right, is joy is always spontaneous. You can't plan to be joyful, right? If you're hiking and you get to the top of a mountain and then suddenly you see a vista, you don't go, I think I'm going to be impressed by the vista now. Oh, no, it just happens, right? Right? Like, when you feel, it's usually when you feel least self-conscious that you become most conscious of the beauty of the world or of a spiritual connection, right? You got to lose some self to get access to the big self, right? I mean, that's why people meditate, right? So they can dial down the ego so that they can become more open to the world around them, the spiritual, fabulous world that's around them. Love is like that, right? You're not a good lover if all you're thinking about is your own pleasure, right? Love is about caring about the other person, passionately caring about how they feel, losing yourself in them and them losing themselves in you. That's what this poem's about, and that's what they're saying what a relationship with God is about, that you will actually get closer to God the more you forget about yourself, just like in a passionate relationship. And it strikes me that that is highly consistent with Eastern views of how one should approach God, right? And this idea of being, you know, swooning with passion for God is not just, you know, in the Song of Songs, not just a Western thing. If you read the poetry of Hafez, for instance, or Rumi, from the mystic Sufi tradition among the Muslims, it's all there. Hafez writes about this all the time, about being drunk in his, just drunk with mystical passion for God, and also seeing God as a lover. Hafez writes about it, and Rumi does too. So it's a way in which human beings have tried to articulate what they're feeling when they get lost in God.
It's in the Ayurvedic system, the chakras, the sacral chakra, the chant that is the basic chant is about I am joyful. So it's so interesting that it would tie into that, because that's the same region as the sexual organ is the sacral chakra. So that I think it goes beyond the physical, that just an overwhelming joyful that it transcends to all the various levels that one could imagine.
Yeah, and this is one of the lessons of Christianity which we find so hard to hear, that Christ and Paul are constantly saying, if you want to be first, you're going to have to be last. If you want to find your life, you're going to have to lose it. All these paradoxical sayings. But if you think about it in terms of a mother's love for a child, or in terms of a lover for their lover, no mother would say, no, my interest first, that infant can just wait. No, you give everything for the infant, right? To the point of self-destruction sometimes even, right? Like, sleep deprivation and all that, right? Like mothers completely empty themselves, devoting themselves to the survival of the infant in love, right? And the same thing is true of lovers, right? Lovers who run into a burning house to save the other. You can forget about yourself when you are deeply, deeply in love with someone else. And great things come of that. Christ is constantly saying it's only when you start to forget yourself, when you set yourself aside, that you will find me. That's when you will start to find me.
That's a hard lesson for women today to hear, on account of we've kind of thrown off the sacrificial love. We're finding time for love for ourselves. Because there was destruction of the feminine. The thing I wanted to raise up is Celtic Christianity. So in a book club that I do with another United Church, we're reading a book by John Philip Newell that profiles through the ages, starting in the early, starting with the changeover from Druidism to Christianity, going up into the present, profiling individuals. And Celtic Christianity is something that's catching on these days, or people are examining. And it's a way of moving through life that allows us to stay connected to the sacred in all things. And I think this concept of a passionate God and an intimate relationship between the soul and the creator is one could find some interesting stuff to read if you looked into what's called Celtic Christianity.
Yeah, and the Celts talk about thin places, right? Those places in the land where the sacred seems particularly near, right? And I mean, Celtic Christianity is interesting because when Christianity came to Ireland, the Celts looked at it and went, yeah, we believe in threes as well for divinity. Like they didn't need to be conquered to be converted, because so much of it made sense to them already. But it's true that they adopted Christianity not in its judgmental aspect, in its master-slave kind of thing, but rather in a God is all around us, a more immanent God, right, than a distant God. So this sort of intimacy, which is coming across in the Song of Songs and the metaphors of the bridegroom, would make sense to them. So I know that this is hard for us to get our heads around. And as I said at the earlier on, this text is basically ignored by Protestants because when the Protestant Revolution occurred in the 1500s, anything that was deeply Catholic was, thrown out the window. And because the Catholics had been interpreting the Song of Songs as being primarily about the relationship of God to the church, well, the new Protestants didn't want to be, just parroting what the Catholics had been saying about themselves using the Song of Songs. So they just sort of set this thing aside. And they said, forget it, like we're not going to use it, which is unfortunate because although we don't think about religion collectively, right? We don't think about, is God close to the United Church of Canada? That makes no sense to us at all, right? But we do understand individualism quite well. So the idea that God could be the bridegroom of our soul, that's a little more possible. But it's still hard to read. So why don't what I'd like to do now is read another passage from the Song of Songs, and then I'm going to read a way of interpreting it where just by changing a couple of words, it becomes more allegorical. So let's see, can I have, I guess, one reader for the pure text? This one's a really good one. Okay, Bonnie, great.
I didn't do it because it's a good one. Finger up just before you said that.
Okay, and this one's a couple of slides long, but if you could do it all until it ends, please. Go ahead.
Her dream. Her dream. I slept, but my heart was awake. Listen, my beloved is knocking. Open to me, my sister, my love, my dove, my perfect one. For my head is wet with dew, my locks with the drops of the night. I had put off my garment. How could I put it on again? I had bathed my feet. How could I soil them? My beloved thrust his hand into the opening, and my inmost being yearned for him. I arose to open to my beloved, and my hands dripped with myrrh, my fingers with liquid myrrh upon the handles of the bolt. I opened to my beloved, but my beloved had turned and was gone. My soul failed me when he spoke. I sought him, but did not find him. I called him, but he gave no answer. Making their rounds in the city, the sentinels found me. They beat me, they wounded me, they took away my mantle, those sentinels of the walls. I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, if you find my beloved, tell him this, I am faint with love.
Great, thank you. And now I'm going to read the same passage with just a few word changes. I slept, but my heart was awake. Listen, my Savior is knocking. Open to me, my sister, my love, my dove, my perfect one. For my head is wet with dew, my locks with drops of the night. I had put off my garment, how could I put it on again? I had bathed my feet, how could I soil them? My Savior thrust his hand into the opening, and my soul yearned for him. I rose to open to my beloved, and my hands dripped with myrrh, my fingers with liquid myrrh upon the handles of the bolt. I opened my heart to my Savior, but my beloved had turned and was gone. My soul failed me when he spoke. I sought him, but did not find him. I called him, but he gave no answer. Making their rounds in the city, distractions found me. They beat me, they wounded me. They took away my mantle, those sentinels of the walls. I adjure you, O daughters of Christ, if you find my Savior, tell him this, I am faint with love. What do you think?
My first inclination is to disagree with a certain line and say Christ would never walk away. Having, answered his knock, he would never not be there. But in fact, in my experience, there have been times where I feel, because I haven't been prompt enough to listen or react to love, that it's disappeared, and I've known that feeling of utter sinking. And there have been times I have literally run around the streets saying, I can't find Christ. And I've reached out in a telephone call to a friend and said, I can't figure out where Jesus is. And I guess because she's a Christian friend, maybe or she was a person, I found Christ through calling, reaching out and talking to someone. God does seem to disappear sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, Bonnie was talking at the very beginning of this about longing, right? The key to erotic poetry is longing. Well, the key to spiritual writing is longing too. You know, I mean, we experience longing and dissatisfaction and loneliness on quite a regular basis, even if you're the most dedicated spiritual person. Right? It's not all one long consummation. Far from it. It seems to be something that we get and then we lose. We get and then we lose. We get and then we lose. Over and over and over again. Many people spend decades wandering around the streets, not even quite sure what they're looking for.
I'm not sure that a lot of us know how to connect. That, we go to church on Sunday and that do a little bit and that's it. But to develop a daily practice of some sort where you're actually developing a relationship as you would with any friend is quite a different matter.
Agreed. Yeah, agreed. And, it's something which I try to encourage people to at least pray every day. Because unless that line of communication is open in an intentional way, you may feel that, church is just some kind of magic that happens on Sunday mornings sometimes, but it isn't. It's really about opening our eyes to what's already there. It's all there all the time. It's just that we don't see it very well. So we're getting near the end, and I just wanted to read one last section, very, very short, and then show you a piece of music that was based on it, which I thought was nice. So this is from chapter 8. So this is where the poem ends. It's not the absolute last words, but it's pretty close. And it's just beautiful poetry as well. Set me as a seal upon your heart, as a seal upon your arm. For love is as strong as death, passion fierce as the grave. Its flashes are flashes of fire, a raging flame. Many waters cannot quench love, neither can floods drown it. If one offered for love all the wealth of one's house, it would be utterly scorned. Because what more can you ask for but a relationship with God? Because if you have a relationship with God, you have a relationship with everything. So as I said at the beginning, there have been tons and tons of musical interpretations. Oh, actually, one other thing. I said the Protestants said, forget it, we'll put this book aside. And what that led to were artists rediscovering it. And in the 20th century, lots of music has been done about this. But in the 19th century, if you Google Song of Songs, you will come across a whole lot of 19th century paintings, and they tend to look like this. In the 19th century, after Napoleon had invaded Egypt, Western artists went to the Middle East for the first time in a long time, and they became just consumed with this idea of the mystical East. And to that, when they found the Song of Songs and they rediscovered it, they went, wow, sexy women in the East, what a fantastic thing to paint. So they painted all these basically kind of pornographic images from the Song of Songs, where You can see in the middle section, for some reason, these women in a hot weather climate are wearing diaphanous clothing because you wouldn't want to be shielded from the sun. So it's all just supposed to look sexy. My wife said for this image on the far left, she said, "What's holding up that thing at her belly button?" How is that even physically possible? Right?
It's lycra. It's lycra.
Is there glue? That's not even vaguely comfortable or possible. So there's been all sorts of questionable interpretations of the Song of Songs on canvas because they just took it as an excuse for Eastern porn, basically. But there have been lots of really nice musical interpretations too. So I'd like to end this with a short video and.
أطلب من تحب نفسي طلبت فما وجدته أطلب من تحب نفسي طلبت فما وجدته وأطوف في المدينة في الأسواق في الشوارع فما وجدته فما وجدته أطلب من تحب نفسي طلبت فما وجدته أطلب من تحب نفسي طلبت فما وجدته وأطوف في المدينة في الأسواق في الشوارع فما وجدته فما وجدته والشتاء مضى ومر والمطر مر وصار والشتاء مضى ومر والمطر مر وصار وطوف في المدينة في الأسواق في الشوارع فما وجدته